Deep in the Blue Mountains of Jamaica, a fearless leader named Cudjoe rose from the shadows of slavery. Armed with nothing but courage, strategy, and his people's unbreakable spirit, he led the Maroons in a war against the mighty British Empire. But who was Cudjoe? And how did a man born into chains become the leader who forced the British to surrender? Stay with me, because the ending will shock you. The word Maroon comes from the Spanish word cimarron, meaning wild or untamed. They were enslaved Africans who had escaped brutal plantations where men were whipped until their skin tore open, women were violated by slave masters, and the enslaved were treated as less than human. From as early as the 1500s, these freedom seekers disappeared into the mountains, vowing never to wear chains again. When the British captured Jamaica in 1655, thousands more ran. They built hidden villages in the forests, surviving off yam, cassava, wild hog, and the knowledge of the land. But they were not just surviving. They were preparing for war. And among them, one man's name struck fear even into the hearts of the British Cudjoe. He was described as short, stocky, and powerful, with piercing eyes that made even his enemies uneasy. He was not just a fighter, he was a commander. He trained his people in the art of guerrilla warfare: strike fast, kill clean, vanish into the bush. The war between the Maroons and the British was not polite, it was bloody. Maroon warriors slit throats in the dead of night, ambushed patrols with poisoned arrows, and chopped down soldiers with machetes. They decapitated British troops and left their heads on spikes as warnings: "Do not enter our mountains." But if you think the British took this humiliation lightly, think again. They unleashed hell in return. They sent hunting dogs trained to rip Maroon flesh, burned entire villages to ash, and hung captured Maroons from trees to rot in the sun as a message. And yet, the Maroons refused to break. For decades, the British poured soldiers, muskets, and gunpowder into Jamaica. But, the jungle was their graveyard. Heatstroke, disease, and Maroon ambushes wiped them out. One British officer even wrote that fighting the Maroons was like chasing shadows through hell. By 1738, Britain was bleeding men and money. And then, something unthinkable happened. Instead of destroying the Maroons, the British made a shocking decision. They offered peace. Imagine that. The world's largest empire, bowing to escaped slaves in the mountains. In March 1739, on a quiet plain in St. Catherine, Cudjoe and the British governor's representatives met face to face. What happened next would change Jamaican history forever. Cudjoe, dressed in simple warrior's clothes, machete at his side, signed a treaty that stunned the world. For the first time, enslaved Africans had not begged for freedom. They had forced the British Empire to surrender it. The treaty granted the Maroons 1,500 acres of land, the right to govern themselves, and complete autonomy in their own communities. But there was a dark clause. They agreed to return future runaway slaves to the British. A bitter compromise, yet one that meant survival. And here's the twist no one saw coming. Jamaica became one of the few places in history where freedom was won not by laws, not by charity, but by fire, machete, and blood. Cudjoe ruled as chief until his death in 1764, and his people thrived in their mountain strongholds. Even today, in a kampong, Maroons gather every January 6th to beat drums, pour libations, and honor the warrior who carved freedom out of brutality. Cudjoe's story is one of savagery and survival, brilliance and brutality. It is the story of how freedom was not granted but taken. Blade by blade, bullet by bullet, life by life. He was more than a rebel. He was a strategist, a nation builder, and a man who proved that even against the largest empire on earth, the human will for freedom cannot be chained. So the next time you hear the thunder of Maroon drums, know this: they are not just music, they are war cries echoing from the mountains. They are the voices of ancestors who chose death before slavery. And now I'll leave you with a question. Would you have had the courage to follow Cudjoe into the mountains? Comment freedom if his spirit inspires you, hit like to spread his story, and subscribe for more untold Jamaican history.